Hello, once again, and welcome to the Common Sense Gospel. I am Danny Simmons,
I'm Kurt Norbit.
and we are going to be looking at the idea of raising godly children today. I'd like to begin by reading Psalm 127, beginning in verse 1. Again, we're talking about raising godly children. Psalm 127 and verse 1. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Down in verse 3 of Psalm 127, it says, Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate. There's a principle that we find in Scripture that is repeated constantly, that if you try to do the things that life requires of you, as far as being a parent or where you work as you're employed, just any number of things that we do in our daily lives, if you do it separate and apart from the Lord, it's vanity, it's vain, because you don't have any light in front of you. You don't know really truly how to handle those things, because that instruction comes from a holy and righteous God who's been gracious to give it to us. And so the challenge there is, if you don't have the Lord involved, then you're doing this all in vain. So we want to start from that place, because it is important to lay down this baseline that we're going to be talking about raising godly children in a godly home, that mom and dad are focused on the Lord. They serve him. The children, if they're too young to know it, they're going to know it because it is part of their daily lives. So how do we raise godly children and focus on the things that we need to focus on in order to be pleasing to the Lord in the way that we raise our children? Psalm 127 tells us that our children are a heritage or a gift from God. In James chapter 1, we're told every perfect gift, every good gift comes from the Father of lights. And so he has placed these children in our hands. We are accountable. We are stewards over their lives. They don't belong to us. You see, if God's given them as a gift, I've been given the responsibility of caring for them and raising them, because God's entrusted that to me, which is just scary. But he's entrusted that to me and now says, do it my way. And these children will be a blessing to you. They'll be profitable to the home and to society. And all of these things get fleshed out through that process of time. And just one more place to think about this idea, because we're laying the foundation of God's requirement for the parents. Deuteronomy 11 is another wonderful place to go. God is urging the people through Moses to keep his law and keep his statutes. Deuteronomy 11 and verse 18 says, Therefore you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, speaking to them when you sit down in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers to give to them, like the days of the heavens above the earth. So there's the promise from God again, that this has to be flowing in your heart, in your life, in your home constantly. And don't forget to tell your children why you live the way you do.
It's you can't, as Jesus alluded in one of his parables, you can't build a house on sand and expect it to stand. If you're going to build a godly home and a godly child, you've got to lay a sound foundation. You can't start when they're 15 and say, "Oh, okay, well now we have to correct things. We're gonna step in now and really get things turned around." It's too late. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. So he's got to be the centerpiece in the home, spoken of all the time, constantly applying lessons, using teachable moments, like a friend does something and that was hurtful, and you talk about that. What does the Bible say about that?
Exactly.
What happened as a result of that? Did that make you happy? What could be done better? Here's what God says about that. And here's what he says, if you do that, here's what will happen. And he's given us promises. We can trust his promises. That they have to be exposed to that all the time, especially these days when a kid sits for hours and hours in school and they're taught the most depraved ungodliness that, well, I was just going to say that we can imagine, but we can't imagine it.
No.
We, unless you're involved, you really don't know what they're being exposed to and how depraved and disgusting and ungodly it is.
Right.
And you are fighting against that. Your child is a battleground, and you have got to win that fight. And with the Lord, you can.
Absolutely. We are fighting an uphill battle. We're swimming against stream, and our children are right in the middle of it. So that's an excellent point. And you saying, these teachable moments that you would look for opportunities. If your son comes home from school, your daughter comes home from school and says, this is what happened, and my best friend got in trouble, that you would spend a few minutes and kind of work through that and say, tell me what you saw. What would you have done? Like you said, and then here's a Bible passage that speaks to that thing, that idea directly. So it sounds to me, Kurt, that you're saying I'm going to have to spend a lot of my time with my kids.
Absolutely, which again is another challenge in this world. They've got so much going on, and when they are home, it's not unusual for them to have their nose glued to a cell phone or a computer or a tablet or something. Uh, you have got to break that chain, and that is a chain.
Yeah.
It's a godly habit that people get into, and they go into their televised world and lose touch with reality, and they're not thinking about God at those times. Um, when we One of the early things we learned about when we were homeschooling our children is the teachable moment, and you have got to spend time with your children to be there when those teachable moments come up, because they come up, they're random. Something happens, something is said, something is done, whatever it might be, and it's a good time to turn that into an applicable lesson. And like you said, apply scripture to it. We've got to show our children that the word of God is relevant,
Absolutely.
that it has a place today, the preeminent place, that it gives us guidance. It's not just a book of old myths and weird fairy tales with a mean old God in the Old Testament, and that's what they're hearing at school.
Yeah.
They need to see that the Bible applies to their lives today, and it always will. It never, being the Word of God, it's never going to go out of style. It always will apply because God knows man, and man doesn't change, though we like to think we do. We don't change. God doesn't change. So his wisdom that's revealed to us isn't going to change.
Yeah.
And it'll always guide us in the right way.
In Luke's gospel, Jesus says, wisdom shall be known by all of her children.
Mm.
And that's a really interesting picture. Wisdom, those who cling to wisdom and follow it, that her children will reveal that it is wisdom. So it works the same in the home, that these principles that are laid out and followed, not just that the kids have to follow these rules we made up, that everyone in the home, the standard's the same. That's the way the Bible works too. Everyone does these things in this home. We love the Lord. We fear God with a reverential fear, and He's in charge. And again, I have no problem saying to my boys, if things get a little hairy on Lil, that's not fair. I say to them, God's given you to me. And the day that you were placed in my arms, I knew that. And so I am not going to leave him in this moment because you're getting pressure from a friend, or we're going to stick to what we have because God won't fail us. And we start thinking these things through on our own, and I start giving in to you on these demands that are obviously still coming from a child. God is cast out of that. Now the child's steering the boat, and that is never a good thing. Again, they're given to us. We're not given to them.
Right.
And that's all part of God's plan. So let's look at the book of Proverbs, and we'll start Proverbs 22:6. We're just going to read a few. We're going to really just kind of fire them off here, and we'll talk about how these apply. So Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Is that a promise from God?
Yes, it is. But it's a principle.
A principle of truth.
Because we all know situations where A child was raised in a godly home, devoted parents involved. I mean,
Yeah.
you couldn't find a fault. There comes a time when that child has to make their own decision.
Especially when there's brothers and sisters who are all doing pretty well,
Yeah,
and one of them just
yep. So there will be exceptions, but if you do this, if you train up a child in the way he should go, there's a much better chance that when he's old, he'll not depart from it than if you don't train him up. If you don't train them up, you got a real, that's almost a guarantee. They are not going to go in the right way. They will depart. But if you train them up in the way that they should go, you are equipping them and they have a much better chance of overcoming the world and making the right decisions. And even if they make the wrong decisions, they know what to come back to.
absolutely.
That's always going to be there in the back of their mind.
That's right. It should come back to say, I know better than this.
Yes.
What am I doing here? How did I make so many poor decisions? And again, like you said, that upbringing, the instruction, it's
Mm-hmm.
still there resting in their heart somewhere. And they can recall that and they'll return. And I appreciate so much that it says, when he is old, he will not
Yeah.
depart from it. Because if you're hoping this holds true when he's 7, 8, 9, 13, 14, you're going to have a lot of frustration because he's going to kick against that as
Mm-hmm.
he's learning the parameters of life and all those things. But it's when he's old and it's time for him to be a responsible adult. It's time for her to be a responsible adult. Those teachings come back to them and it should guide them in the right way, at least to some degree. So it's not a hard and fast promise. It's a principle of truth that you typically works itself out for the very best for the child and for the parent. And I don't want to miss the word train because you
Yep.
were telling us we got to
That's
spend a lot of time with our kids.
that's our part. Yeah.
Training?
You don't want them to depart from it. You have some work to do. Don't just leave it up to them. Set them up to succeed. You have to you have to train them.
That's
Just
right.
like you it's like you train a dog, for example. When you give them a command and they don't do it, there are consequences.
Right.
When they do it, there are consequences. They get a reward or
The
something.
reward.
They see something good that results from this. If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, then I see something bad's going to result from this. And I'll tell you what, if you want to see the result of a lack of discipline and a lack of training, look around society today. Look at the way people are acting.
I know. Adults.
Where'd they get that?
Yeah.
They haven't been trained up in the way they should go. So they're just going their own way, and it's a disaster.
It always is.
So it is a real thing. Our job is to train. Then hopefully they'll make the right decisions.
Yeah.
And part of that training is, as Proverbs does point out repeatedly, is discipline, but done properly.
Sure.
The proper motive and the proper attitude. Uh, Follow that discipline up with love. Sit down and explain. Here's why that happened.
That's part of training too.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
there's training, and you're showing that child. I didn't enjoy this, and I didn't do it just so I could get some kicks or make you feel bad or instill some pain or whatever. There's a purpose. God says this is what is to be done, and here's what can result. So, what can we do to avoid this in the future? You have to show there are consequences and that whatever you reap, you're going to sow.
Yeah.
That's a biblical principle.
And you're giving them room to decide next time around what they'll do. They
Right.
still have a choice.
Yeah.
But this consequence will not change.
Yep.
So just
And
remember.
that's the thing. Consistency
Yes,
is
consistency
so
is
important.
You think about training, the military. If our military is going to go into war, I want every single one of those soldiers trained thoroughly.
Yep.
And why is that? Because when bullets start flying, they fall back. As I understand it, they fall back on that training. That it's
Yep.
natural instinct. It works the same with our children. You can't just hope your kids are going to turn out okay. You have to train them in the things that you've come to understand and know about society, life, all of the different issues that we face. That you are the one who's prepared to lend those things to them, to instill that truth and understanding, and like you said, work it out verbally and then through actions, and then commend them for doing well and rebuke them when they do poorly because you are training them. Who wants to sit and lay down underneath the knife of a doctor who has no training,
Yeah.
but just always wanted to be a doctor?
Yeah.
No, thank you. My insurance won't pay for that, by the way, because he's not qualified. She's not
Right.
qualified. So that's ridiculous. So in one realm, we go, oh, well, you have to have training. I want to see your degree. And then with kids, it's like,
Completely ignored. Yep.
how can we do that? Why? The word says train. So Proverbs 22:15, we'll stay in the same chapter. I
Mhm.
love this. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Now that is true. Foolishness is bound
Yes.
up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. So again, we have mom, dad watching the child. Foolishness is already just sown into his heart. He doesn't know,
Yeah.
right? That's the reason. He just doesn't
He
know.
doesn't have the life experience. He doesn't have the maturity.
No,
He doesn't have the knowledge in the word yet. He's got to depend on his parents for that. But even though it's bound in the heart of the child, what will drive it far from him is the rod of correction. And again, it's you don't beat the crud out of him just to okay. Bible said beat him, so I'm going to beat him. And boy,
and
am
yeah,
I
him
going to
not
beat him!
understand why. That's
Yeah,
not
he has no clue except that you're over there wailing away. That is not godly discipline. I think we are going to see that in a minute. Um, the right kind of discipline and why it's applied. It's applied out of love. Uh, Here's your choice. Your kid does something foolish and you don't discipline him. What have you just taught him?
no consequences.
Foolishness.
Yeah, it's good to be foolish.
The foolishness is going to remain.
Yeah,
And he's going to be a fool then the next time a similar situation comes up. And it'll only get worse.
that's right.
Uh, Another thing we learned in homeschooling and raising kids like that is you've got to establish boundaries. And that's what God does with us. And really, in deep inside, those kids want boundaries. They want to see where they are. When you've got sheep in a nice fenced in pasture, they feel safe
Right.
because nothing can get to them. You take away that fence, you remove the boundary, they're out wandering out. They just go wander. Oh, there's some good looking grass over there.
They're
Now
in danger.
they are prey.
Yeah.
They're fair game for whatever comes along. Uh, so those boundaries have to be set and consistently maintained, and your child will feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to complain, they're going to whine, and well, my friends are doing it, or whatever might come up. But they want to feel safe. They want to know that their parents care. They want to know that their parents are going to protect them from the dangers that they can't see, like the sheep outside the pasture,
That's right.
that they're unaware of. They can't foresee that because there is no experience there. So you've got to keep that boundary of safety until that child now is old enough and trained enough to be able to face those decisions on their own when they leave the home.
That's exactly right.
But where do the boundaries come from? It's the Word of God.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed as I was, thinking about this discussion we were going to have, how much the Bible says about raising children and godly families, especially in Proverbs.
That's right.
But also in Colossians 3 and Ephesians 6, the New Testament emphasizes what the godly home looks like and gives us the example of Timothy. You've known the scriptures, that you were raised by your grandmother and your mother in the Holy Scriptures. So you know the right way.
That's right.
So they trained him up.
And he says, fall back upon that
Yeah.
as you move forward.
And Timothy was probably the helper, the co-evangelist, if you will, that Paul respected and loved the most.
That's right. He said there was no one else like him in
Yep.
the Philippian letter. He speaks very highly of Timothy, and Timothy's relatively young. So all those things are there. The rod of reproof. You have to watch your children. Again, we're back to spending time with them. Watch them. And then it's up to you how you do that. One parent will grab the rod. One parent uses a belt. One parent knows that the belt doesn't seem to work because the kid is just, got a certain way about him. Again, train up a child in the way he should go. It's implied, train him up in God's way, but it's also implied that they have a way about them.
Yeah.
So know your child, and if the spanking is not the right correction for them because they're just not responding to it in a really healthy and good way, that's for you to monitor and then adjust it. Some kids hate sitting in timeout.
Mm-hmm.
So guess what you're going to do? You're going to sit on your bed and you're going to think about what you've done, and that just drive a kid crazy. And we see that that's working, then that's the way we move forward.
Yeah.
So the rod of correction is something that is determined by the parent as they watch the child and understand what they respond to. They're all different, and they're all going to bring different challenges for us, and we have challenges, but for them, just in the way that we raise them, there's all kinds of difficulty in this. But consistency is key, and this picture of training is absolutely fundamental, and that rod of correction is used consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just add, do not change the rules for your second, third, and fourth child.
Right, exact. Oh boy.
You want to give ammunition to kids who think something's
You are
not
going to
fair?
build resentment. The other child, those who get special treatment, the one who didn't, is going to see that right away.
Black sheep.
And they will become bitter.
That's right.
They will hate you for that.
So
it just is not going to work.
And I would say for a parent, because sometimes I just said, train the child in that way in which they respond. So some of that may look different to the second or third child, but we're aware of that, right? I know what I did with you, and now I know what I'm doing with him or her. So I have to be able to verbalize.
There's the consistent discipline.
Let me show you what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and then be able to explain that. They don't need a thorough explanation, but they need to know that you're aware of that and you are not playing favorites. I love every one of you equally the same. Every one of you has been handed to me by Almighty God, and I will not change the end result I'm moving toward. And if a kid's old enough to complain about it, they're old enough to process that. Your sister is not you, and you're not your sister. Right. So let me do this the best way I know how, and we will see this through. I'm sorry you think it's not fair, but I'm doing the best I can. I think an acknowledgement of that levels things out again.
Yeah, they see it's just as unpleasant for the other child as my discipline was for me. They might not be disciplined the same way, but it's the same concept.
Yeah. Guidelines are there.
As an example for that, I've only seen my son spank one of his daughters once, and it was a relatively mild pat on the rear end.
Right.
That was enough. Most of the time, it was just a threat of a spanking.
Sure.
Was enough to, straighten them out and get their attention. But that was because they had been laying the groundwork.
Right.
And like you said, they spent time with their daughters. They were involved with their daughters. They knew what was going on in their lives, and they knew what would work with them. They didn't really have to threaten them with corporal punishment. But when they did lay it out that you keep up with this and it's going to be a spanking.
Right.
Man, they didn't like that idea at all.
And everyone understood. If it came to that, everyone understood why it happened.
Right. They got
violated
warning.
the instruction.
They knew what was going on.
I think that's really important too. We don't want to hit a child because they're being foolish. Foolishness is bound up. But we do want to, if we see it, we'll say, hey, I noticed that you think this is okay. Here's the rule.
Yeah.
Now, once the rules are clear, now you can engage in the punishment for the crime because they've been made aware and they say, okay, I understand what you're saying. We've got some acknowledgement from them. I'm, again, assuming that they're old enough to reason with. Make those rules clear. That way, when you come to them and say, you need to be spanked, we're going to do this, that they're not thinking, what just happened? Why?
Right. Yes.
Because that's not fair to them.
No.
And I would just say, since we're talking about it, never strike a child in anger.
Exactly. I was just thinking that.
Never strike a child anywhere but on the big slab of meat that God provided for spankings to take place. Because I think anything other than that area means you got a problem.
Yeah. There's a you problem there.
I really do. A child is defenseless. We are so much bigger and stronger than they are. And that is
they're
done.
going to see that too. And it has a devastating effect.
Yes, that's right. So control, don't do it in anger, very important. So someone says, okay, I've listened to Kurt's advice and I've listened to Dr. Spock and I'm going to follow Dr. Spock. Well, hold on, don't turn us off. Proverbs 13, the Lord brings it up again. Proverbs 13 and verse 24 says this, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Do it quickly. We're not going to let that happen here. Don't do that.
There has to be a close equation to the action and the consequence.
Absolutely.
You did this, and boy, in a month, you're going to really get a spanking for it.
You just wait.
Yeah. So they're wondering what's going on, and a month later, they get spanked for what? What is going on here?
That makes no sense.
They don't even remember what was done. when you train an animal, it's an immediate reward or an immediate punishment
Yeah.
for how that animal handles the reaction. And I'm not saying our children are animals, but we respond that way. We
Yeah.
respond to immediate reward or discipline
That's right.
because we equate that result to the action.
Yeah.
And we learn the lesson that when you behave this way, most of the time in life, there's going to be an immediate consequence.
Right.
So that needs to be instilled.
Be quick to do both. Be prompt with the rod. Be prompt with the commendation and the encouragement.
Yes,
That, I saw
absolutely.
what you did. I saw you share your toys. I cannot tell you how
Yep.
proud I am
Yep.
of you. That is hard to do, and you did it. And I'm just so happy to see that in you. And because we appreciate compliments from our boss, we appreciate compliments from our husband and wife. So of course, a child needs that positive because now they have something to move toward. It's not always, oh, if I do this, I'll be spanked.
Yeah.
It's if I do this right, I mean, my parents will be proud of me, and that should just mean the world to a child. And so that has to be there, and the consistency needs to be there. Proverbs 23:13, do not withhold correction from a child. If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. Isn't that interesting? Solomon says that. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to kill him. But if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. That is powerful language about what discipline means and the impact that it has on a young person's life long term.
Yeah, I was just thinking that we're spending most of our time in Proverbs here, and Proverbs is not the only segment of the scriptures that deals with raising a child, as we've mentioned. But Proverbs is part of the wisdom literature.
Yeah.
And so this is wisdom in raising up a child. Some of this wisdom sounds like it doesn't fit because we have so much indoctrination and propaganda thrown out by the world that just basically defies God.
Right.
Oh, you should not discipline your children. You should allow them to make their decisions and yada, yada, yada. Spanking is evil. Striking a child. Well, yes, depending on the context. We've talked about the wrong way that you should never treat a child.
That's right.
But God says the infliction of a little bit of discomfort is going to work wonders.
It will.
And when it's properly applied and the child knows what's going on and it's consistent, it will reap the reward. It will raise up a godly child.
Yes.
That is wisdom.
That's right.
And we cannot be afraid to proclaim that in the face of the world.
And the picture is always given like, well, I love my child too much. Well, let's work this out for a minute.
What did Solomon just say?
Yeah, if you don't use the rod, you hate them. That's the opposite of love. And so the proverb is correct. What we're talking about is you seeing a child with foolishness in their heart, misbehaving, doing something wrong, and in the confines of your home, under your oversight and guidance, you instill these truths into the child's life at a pace that you have determined as the parent. Again, the gift given by God, that those things are determined by you, they're monitored by you. This type of discipline is effective and it works because when they leave the home and they get into a social situation, no one's ever told them they can't yell like that or they can't cuss at people.
Yeah.
And they get into a situation in the world, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is you love them so much you did nothing, and now the world will enforce the discipline that's in place to keep society sane. And my dad always used to tell me and my brother when we were younger that it's going to work two ways. You can discipline yourself, which is your best option, or society will discipline you, which is not the option you want, no matter what you think. And so that's always kind of stuck in my mind that I can do this, what I already know to be the right way, and avoid the discipline from outside where my hands are shackled and I have no say in the matter. Right. And a judge or a jury is now going to. And so all these people who love their kids are going to court dates with an adult child who they never took the time to use the proper discipline because they said, I love my kid. And that is a broken thought process that love means letting them do whatever. Yeah. That is the opposite of love.
To go back to that earlier picture, and There are probably a lot of people who wouldn't like to hear this, but if you blur those boundaries, you make those boundaries vague or don't set them up at all, you're showing that you don't care
Yeah,
about that child's well-being, and they're going to see that.
that's right. It
That
will
you're
come
just
out.
letting them do whatever they want. You're going to reap the whirlwind, and we see it far too often. And I'll just, I'll touch on a thing. Where are all these uh, mass shootings coming from that everyone, these tragedies?
Yeah,
How could a young person do that? Look at the home. That's where I
absolutely.
would start.
Yeah, that's right. Let's
They
see what's
haven't they
happening.
haven't been trained up, and they haven't had. Now, I understand there are difficult situations and what have you, but I know of parents in very difficult situations that did manage to spend time with their children, and they did set the boundaries, and they were consistent. So it can be done, and we're seeing the results of it not being done now. We're
Well,
seeing a society that is too tolerant, too unwilling to discipline, and now we have wild people out there that will commit unspeakable acts uh, upon innocent people because for them it's not wrong, no
yeah,
big deal.
yeah. And for a parent who has been training, in other words, sitting down, rising up, visiting with them, parent would pick up on those tendencies way before they
That's right.
grew into fruition
Yeah.
and could deal with that in the home. And instead, like you were saying, they're in their room with the door locked, watching who knows what and listening to who knows what and making decisions based on a foolish heart that was never trained. That is not always, exactly what happened in every situation, as you said. We don't
Hmm.
know each scenario, but it is well worth the time of those who want to know why this is happening to look into the home. Who calls the shots here? Who's in charge? Is there a father?
Yeah.
All those things, all those questions need to be asked, and you will see that God has been left out of the equation.
Yep, that is the bottom
I
line.
believe every time.
Yes.
And so, just coming off of that, I want to share one thing that is also very important because there's also a proverb, there's several of them, but this assurance to the parent. Proverbs 19:18 is the one that I'll use. Proverbs 19:18 says, "Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction."
Mm.
The NIV says, "Do not be a willing part to their death." Chasten them while there is hope, and do not be a willing part to their death. So that removes this. Well, I love them too much.
Yeah, if you love them,
Uh,
you're going to do the work
would you be
because
willing to
they're
let
worth
them
it.
die?
Yeah.
No.
Love is sacrificing what might be best for you for what is best for the other person.
That's right.
Doing what's best for them. If you love your children, you're going to sacrifice yourself. You're
That's
going
right.
to give your time. You're going to give your effort. You're going to give your attention. You'll give your consistency, your focus, because they should be important enough to deserve that,
It's
and they
hard.
need it. And it is hard work.
It's a labor of
God
love.
never says being a parent's easy.
No.
I don't think it ever has been, and it never will be. You're dealing with an individual,
That's right.
and individuals have their own ways, they have their own thoughts, they make their choices. But God has laid out the pattern for us that if we do these things, that child has a much better chance for not only material success but spiritual success, and that's the most important thing.
That's right. So we watch them step into adulthood. They're making good decisions. They're doing what's right as far as your guidance and guidelines were established. And then you can read with just great joy in your heart Proverbs like Proverbs 15 and verse 20, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just a truth, that when the son stands up for what's right, does what's right, the father's heart is overjoyed. There's peace in the home. I don't stay up late at night wondering where my children are
Yeah.
or if they're involved in some crime that I saw on the news. None of those things even cross my mind. That is peace. That is comfort because the work was done initially to lead them to a direction that was appropriate and was upright. And so God's promise of the peace in the home in the later years is there as well. And I don't want to miss that. We're working toward a goal. We want the children to be successful in all that they do. But we ourselves, when they leave the nest, we want to go to bed at night and know that we have good children who are now taking their turn to raise their children. And it's just such a great thing. And I would hate to rob myself of that by thinking, I think the Lord's wrong. I'll do it my way. And to realize at the end of it that I was not even close. That's torture for a person in their later years to have a son, just worried about the phone ringing again because the cops are going to want to talk to you. That is torture. And to some level, to some degree, it is your fault.
Yep. Um,
That would just haunt me
I
forever.
can't argue with that. Yeah, that
Forever.
is whatever that child does while they're in the home is a reflection on the parent.
Yeah.
And the parent has to bear some responsibility for that.
That's right. Absolutely. Because they were placed into your arms as an infant, and you had them from day one. So who else are we going to turn to?
It's your stewardship. Yeah.
Just a quick practical application to some of this. Like, how do I start helping my child? How do I start instilling this godly truth to raise a godly child in my home? I just want to give you one that I think is really important. It's got a fundamental principle to it that I think will guide them for all of their years. And that's Proverbs 16:31 says the silver-haired head is a crown of glory if it is found in the way of righteousness. I would talk to my children about honoring the elderly, be respectful, speak clearly to them, shake their hand, look them in the eye, ask them how they're doing, train my children to be able to do that at a very young age. Honor the gray-haired man or woman because it's a crown of glory to them. And your kids aren't going to understand all of that because old people are, first of all, not young, and they don't look like us, and they can't see or hear very well. That is not the point. The point is they have walked the entire pathway of life, and you have an understanding of that, even at the most basic level. And growing in that, honor, respect your elders. Now that's going to mean, Kurt, that when you pull up to grandma and grandpa's house, you tell your kids, give me your phones. Those are staying here. We're going to go in. We're going to show respect to your grandparents. You owe them everything. They're the reason you're here.
Yeah.
Let's go show them the respect they deserve. Leviticus 19 and verse 32 says that when a gray-haired man steps into the room or into the group, that the young people should stand up. They should arise to show honor and reverence toward, and God again knows that there's something there, that the sooner they take hold of that, the better off they're going to be as they move through those years and learn that grandma and grandpa do know a few things about life and they can be a great resource. They deserve that respect. And I think if we could just get that started, if you're looking for a starting point, just start working on that. Let's honor the elderly. Let's write a card to somebody who's sick and needs some encouragement that, man, you've done such a great thing for your children in the long term.
I was just looking at Hebrews 12, and I would encourage folks to read verses 5 through 11, but especially verse 6. The Lord loves, for whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son he receives. And then verse 11, the concluding thought, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness by those who have been trained by it.
That is everything we've been talking about.
Yep.
Hebrews chapter 12. And he says if you're not disciplined in those passages, then you're illegitimate and you're not sons.
Yeah.
If you're saying, oh, the Lord doesn't discipline me, we got a problem. Because we all need to be corrected. We all need to be redirected in our thoughts, our actions, the way we say and do things. So that should constantly be there. God chastens us by his living word. And if we're responding to that, we're in a good place.
Yep. He is the ultimate parent and the perfect parent.
Oh, yeah. There's none greater. And that's another thing I wanted to mention was that, especially dads, as you train your children, that you are a reflection. As poor as you are and as poor as I am, as being a reflection of Almighty God, that's where God's put me as a father. And so I need to reflect the Lord in the consistency, all the things we talked about. Because when they start to think about him and if they should honor and respect and obey, all those things are already there. And they're far more likely to say, hey, I know how this works, and I want to walk with the Lord. It's all by God's design. It's a beautiful thing. So we cannot fail our children at these younger ages and just hope it'll all work out.
No, if you leave it up to chance, you're going to lose.
Every time.
That is a bad bet.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we sure hope this has been helpful. We need to do some trivia questions and see if we can trip each other up. I want to let you go first because I feel really good about my biblical knowledge.
Trivia time.
Sweet trivia.
Okay. Actually, this first one ties into what our subject was in this podcast. When the Israelites are going into the promised land, they passed between two mountains where the blessings and the cursings were announced to them. You know, the blessings for obeying the law and the cursings for disobeying the law. What were the names of those two mountains?
Man,
They split the Israelites up. As part of the people they put on one mountain and they announced the blessings, and another they put on the other mountain and they announced the cursings.
is Horeb one of them?
No.
Pisgah?
Nope.
Kilimanjaro?
Close.
Really?
No.
Ararat? Everest?
We're thinking of Palestine here.
So it's probably something like Boaz and some name that means truth and.
Well, actually, I should have looked at that and see what the names mean, but it's not that significant, I don't believe.
All right, well, tell us because I bet no one got this.
From Deuteronomy 11 at verse 29, the blessings were announced from Mount Gerizim and the curses from Mount Ebal.
Okay, yeah.
Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim.
Deuteronomy 11, which we read out of at the beginning of this podcast. Nice.
But there it was. God was telling the people, obey, rewards.
Yeah.
Blessings will come. Disobey, curses.
That's right.
The consequences.
So he laid out the rules and the instruction before implementing.
Yeah. And so they knew what they needed to do.
That's right.
From the very start.
And they said they would.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's the child going, yes, I understand the rules. Okay.
Yeah.
You've told me understand. So here we go.
So
I am watching you.
You are now accountable.
That's right. And there are blessings for doing what's right.
Okay. So lay one on me here.
All right. So we've been in the book of Proverbs. Finish this proverb.
Oh, boy.
Oh, it's not hard. There is a way that seems right unto a man. What's the rest of it?
But the ends thereof are the ways of death.
That's right. Proverbs 14:12 and Proverbs 16:25, word for word, say the same thing. There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Very good.
Cool. Alrighty. In the old law, the Israelites were to love the stranger who dwelt among them as they loved themselves. What is the reason God gave to the people?
I know this one.
That they were to teach, that they were to behave that way toward the stranger.
He reminds them that they were two strangers.
That's right.
They entered into a foreign land that was not their own.
Yep. Well, even more fundamentally, that's true. They were strangers that entered a land that God gave them. But Leviticus 19:34 tells us they had been strangers in the land of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so their treating the strangers among them would remind them, hey, we were like this one time too. So
we know what it's like to be mistreated.
And we know what it's like, right? And so they were to show that respect and care for the stranger.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's
somebody said that, huh?
A wise man, I believe.
Yeah.
I've said it before too.
Amazing how they could take that principle and put it in just to a few immortal words. Huh?
That's right. That is God's wisdom and power.
Yeah.
Question number 2 for you.
Okay.
How did Rebekah and Jacob trick Isaac into thinking Jacob was Esau? What was the plan that Rebekah and Jacob, mostly Rebekah?
They cooked up a nice stew and then dressed up Jacob in Esau's clothes and put goat skin on his hands and arms and everything because Esau was hairy.
That's right.
And Jacob was not. And so Esau was, Jacob was not. But when he went to his father, of course, his father was blind by that time, he would feel him. Mm-hmm. And, oh, yeah, you're hairy. You sound like Jacob, but you feel like Esau. So
that's right.
And then he ate the stew, and wow, that's the same good cooking. So
I owe
it
you a
must be
blessing.
Esau. Yeah, so he gave him his blessing.
Stole the birthright
Yeah,
from under his brother. Yeah, the deception in that chapter is just, I mean, it's just it makes me so uneasy to read and watch
yeah.
mom and
What
son
scheming?
work
What this?
against dad.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot to that. God told her that the older would serve the younger, but it didn't say that she tied
and
that together.
Esau had given up his blessing
That's right. So there's more
for a
to
bowl
it.
of pottage, but still, it doesn't excuse them.
No, it's so that the passage is Genesis 27, 1 through 29 is really that entire segment. But Isaac, when Jacob comes in and says, it's me, Father, I brought your stew that you asked for, because he did ask him to go get the savory meat. The first thing Isaac says to him is, how did you bring it so quickly?
Yeah, yeah. Already
And
he's
then Jacob
suspicious.
says, oh, the Lord put it in my hands.
Yeah.
So he says, come near to me so I can touch you and know whether you are really my son Esau or not.
And
He
so
knew.
he smelled him.
Yep.
He was suspicious.
He knew.
It's hard to fool Dad as to who you are. I mean, come on.
That's me, Dad. The great hunter.
Yeah.
No, that's not who you
Yeah.
say you are.
Not fitting here.
Which again speaks to a father and his children, that
Yes.
they know their way, they know their voice, they know the stride of their walk.
Mm-hmm.
They know
All
how
the
they
little idiosyncrasies, the way they talk.
how they reel in a rod and reel when they're fishing,
Mm-hmm.
because we're with them and we spend that time. We are training them. We love them, and they're God's gift to us on this earth, and it's just such a special privilege. So we hope this has been encouraging to all of you, and that next time they act up, let them have it. Bottom line,
With love.
with love. Have a blessed day. Continue to serve God and honor Him with all that you say and do. Let that fragrance of faithful obedience to God be true in your home first and foremost, and the rest will take care of itself.